this is the life-changing thing. So the same way that you guys had that with being intentional, taking back and figuring out what you wanted to do with your kids, like you get those aha moments and then it's like forever, you can't live without it. So
Absolutely. And kudos to you because you did what I've been talking about, which is like you listen to your body's reaction. You know what I mean? Like people take that for granted. They think that, oh, I'll just know. It's like, no, you won't know unless you're looking. You won't
yeah,
know
you have
because
to be intentional.
you have to be intentional because if you're not, then you're going to think that this is just the norm. Your norm is that my face is this way or that my skin is that way or my hair is dandruffy or whatever it is. Like you're going to just think it's separate and or you're just not going to connect the dots. So you always have to be curious. You always have to be curious. I caution anyone and as we mentioned, I've been in the field a long time and I still won't tell you like this is the way you're supposed to eat because I won't tell you that because everyone everyone has their way and what's working for me may not work for you and even mine is constantly at work. Like I'm constantly a work in progress because the reality is too is that as we change and age and as our hormones change, like it also changes how our bodies respond to food. So you always have to be curious because you're never gonna find, like you said earlier, like that magic pill. You're never gonna find one way that's gonna forever work.
Yeah.
And also, and then let's not forget this, is like you also gotta enjoy life. Like life is short. And in no way should what we're talking about, from the boundaries with kids in your kitchen to just like listening to your body, in no way should those be things that are adding to your stress. Like you
Mm.
need to go at your pace. This idea that we have to already be at Z when we're currently at B is just insane. Like everyone is going at their pace, and you got to honor your process. And your process may be you taking, like you said, like you might have to be sick for a while before you finally feel ready to make a change, and that's okay if that's as long as it's not something killing you, right? But either way, you're gonna go at your process. Like there's sadly two things that get someone to change. And I wish it was different, but this is the reality, and I'm sure you're going to concur with this, is there's really only two reasons why someone will make a change to their diet. They do it because they discovered that they're sick, that they're truly ill or they have some kind of serious illness, or someone they love has gotten sick. And it's sad to me that it takes you or someone you love to get sick for you, for us to change and to move out of those comfort zones. It's like, but if there's anything that people take away from our conversations, that I hope that you will not wait till there's a fire, but you will actually be looking for smoke, and wherever there's smoke, start to make the changes. Do
Yeah,
not
and
wait for
I
that fire.
I love that you said that. And that's why the huge part of my practice, I always say like the first session whenever I meet with people is literally just teaching body awareness. Because if you don't know the neutral state that you're in now, but you have unrealistic, like, this is where I want to be, and you've convinced yourself you're here, or you're here and you're convinced that you're back here, wherever you are, we have to first be thankful and appreciative for the body that we have now and see where it's at and be proud of where it's at. And then from there, we can be like, okay, yeah, well, now every time after I eat, if I touch my stomach or my liver, do you even know where those are in your body? Two, does it get distended or do you never look in the mirror naked? Like it's such a process. But I tell people that you have to start with one thing at a time, right? Even if you just want to start consuming more water, for the first week, you're going to be using more bathroom breaks. You're going to have to start looking to what type of water you'd want to drink, right? How you want to hydrate. So if you pick one thing at a time and go from there, and then slowly implement lifestyle changes, that's when your life really does change. So it's amazing hearing a chef say this. This is why I was so excited to talk to you. I'm serious. I listened to a few other interviews with you, and I was just sitting there like, James has so much wisdom. I can't wait to talk to him. I feel like we're
Oh, thank you.
kindred spirits.
Well, and just to kind of reinforce that little girl in you that was looking for things that you could check off, or kind of like that list.
Mhm.
Um, I think that, it's really important that people remember also that we all need those markers. So anyone that's hearing this is going like, okay, I'm going to start, doing this and be more mindful, but like take a photo right now, like have
Yeah.
something to look back on, or write down a journal entry of exactly how you're feeling, so that 6 months from now, when you're feeling totally different, you have a reference, because a lot of people forget. They forget where they've come from and how far they've come. They suddenly, and this happens all the time, but like people will reach a new norm and they'll be like, oh, that's right. They'll be like, I just don't feel like anything's changed. And
Yes.
and they'll be still stuck in the mud with it. But then the
Mhm.
person working with them will be like, well, let's go back to 6 months ago. Let's look at the photos. Like, oh my gosh, look at how different you look. And let's look at what you wrote in your journal. Like you talked about this pain, this irritation. And like, do you have those anymore? Like, oh no, I don't. And because here's the reality is like we're our health is kind of like an onion. So it's like there's so many layers, and a lot of times the body is basically in the body's really resilient. And so the body is in a place where it's like holding on. So like you might see one health element going on, and you might work through that, and that's the peeling of one layer. But then something new shows up, and part of you might go like, well, wait, what happened here? Like we were doing this and then you made this happen. It's like, no, no, I didn't make that. Your body's finally just relieved enough that it's revealing the true issue or a
Yes.
deeper issue. And it's
I
like,
literally joke with people all the time that Shrek was right.
yeah, yes, life is like it's totally true. So yeah, and so I do want to answer that one question you had, which is why New Zealand?
Oh, yes. I know.
Okay.
Sorry. I get excited.
No, totally. I'm just being mindful because I know that was an important one for you. So New Zealand, there's really it's kind of a deeper question than you might think, because one is like, well, why not the US? What's going on in the US, right? And then the other is, well, why New Zealand specifically? Well, so first of all, in the US, we have a supply chain that's very divided. It's not very cohesive. So you go to like some slaughterhouses and they don't even allow you to get parts of the animal. Like so you can't even there's certain parts of the animal that you can't even get because the FDA has them on some, or USDA or FDA, one of the two has it on some list that says you cannot retail these parts of the animal. Brain is one of them, a few of the glands are another. I think lungs
My
may be on
goodness.
there as well.
I was gonna say brain is one of the top ones that because of
Yeah,
mad cow disease, right?
right. But there's sort of like I've heard that actually it's because the pharmaceutical companies get them. They have a contract with the government. I don't know if that's true, but that's just what I've heard. So so you can't even get access to certain parts of the animal. Then secondly, even the parts you think you should be able to get access to, you can't. Like I tried to source Pluck in the US. So Pluck has liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas. I got as far as spleen, and spleen was really hard to find. So liver, heart, and kidney really easy. Spleen a lot harder, and pancreas virtually impossible. I could not find a provider of 100% grass-fed beef here in the US that had pancreas available. Well, why? It's because these slaughterhouses have HACCP plans. So those are their safety plans that they have to someone has to write up. It takes time. The slaughterhouse has to see value in them taking the time to cut that part of the animal and supplying it for human grade. And then they also have to ensure that they have staff that's trained well enough to cut that part of the animal, because like the heart, like basically organ meats, one of the terms for organ meats is called offal, OFFAL. And they think that that term came out, I know it's a perfect name because it's like a lot of people think they taste awful, but what they think that name came from is that when you slaughter an animal, these are the parts that fall off. So awful, right?
Oh, okay.
So that is true with like the heart and like the kidney. Like these parts just kind of like are right there, very easy to get to. Well, the pancreas a little harder, spleen a little harder. Like those parts of the animal, you have to have more precision cuts. And the reality is that we're losing a lot of trade knowledge. So we have people that are butchers, but they're not very well trained butchers, and it's hard. And then of course a trained butcher is going to be more expensive. So these are all tied into basically showing you that the US is just not set up for the supply chain of the whole animal. New Zealand and Argentina are. So you go to either of those countries and they are absolutely, that is one of their major exports is beef. And they are not just focused on the muscle, they're focused on the whole animal. And New Zealand, for example, does a lot of exporting to China, and China is very pro whole animal. So they eat all parts of the animal. So New Zealand, why New Zealand is deemed better than Argentina is it's an island, and they're very tight-fisted about what they allow onto that island because they covet their industry and they don't want their industry to be tainted. And their island gets green grass year round. So, and there's virtually no other area in the world that does that. So
Wow.
even in the US, if something says it's 100% grass fed, it's not necessarily green grass. So the animals are allowed to pasture a certain time of year, but during the winter they can't go to pasture. So a lot of times that's grass that's been, hay or whatever. It's dead grass. Sometimes they'll ferment the grass to make it more nutrient viable, but
Yeah, or
it's not the
barley.
same. Yeah, and then they'll add other things like corn or soy or whatever to support the animal. Um, and get them plump because they can't pasture them. But New Zealand can. So is New Zealand perfect? No, they definitely are not 100% pastured animals from the
Mhm.
whole island. You can source from providers that only get animals from those pastured, and they have a lot of pastured animals, so like a lot of 100% grass-fed animals. Um, so that's why you choose New Zealand. You can get literally almost every part of the animal. I mean, we're looking with Pluck. So I really believe in like supports like, and I'm a big, big proponent of that.
I was gonna ask you about that because that's your guys' motto for Pluck, right?
Yeah, like supports like. So the idea is that the part of the animal you're eating is going to support that part in you. You're eating muscle meat, it's going to help build your muscle. You're eating liver, it's going to support your liver detoxification. So there's lots of things. And since we've seen with COVID and just in general that we're seeing more and more people have lung issues. So my thought is, I want to add lung to Pluck to support people in eating lung. I want to eventually make brain available as well, because if you talk to any person that used to grow up on a farm, even I want to say 50 to 80 years ago, they will all tell you that they had brain with eggs. Like that was a common meal.
Yeah.
And you could argue that we don't eat brain anymore. And so you could argue, well, that us not eating brain and the increase in dementia and Alzheimer's might go well together. They might actually coincide. Now, I'm not saying that eating or not eating brain is going to solve it, but how do we know or not know whether eating brain will help offset the issues that are happening? So we don't know, but I really gravitate more towards, well, it's gonna help. It's gonna help more than it would hurt, as long as you're getting it from a healthy animal, right? And it's tested, which we would do. And New Zealand does provide brain from healthy animals. And there's no issue of, getting stuff from mad cow. Like, why wouldn't you eat it? Particularly if we make it really easy for you to get it in your diet.
I love that. Can I say the one thing? I've tried brain, I've literally tried everything. The one thing that is really hard for me that I haven't been able to get down and I want to be able to eat it whole would be an eyeball. That is the
Oh,
that is, I don't know if you have good eyeball recipes, but I would have to literally put it in a meat grinder because there's no way. Just it freaks me out to be able to see
yeah,
the
the
eyeball.
texture, right?
But
Yeah, no, I
yeah,
understand
the
that. I mean,
gooey, I want to do it though so badly. Like I want to just be able to pop it and eat one because people have said that it actually like the juices are really good and it tastes wonderful, especially in a stew or a soup, which I wanted to say, I've noticed that the easiest way for me to be able to integrate those meals was making like condensed stews and kind of putting everything in a pot together where I felt like I got to eat everything in general. And like I would try, every bite felt like something different that I was trying. So if people are kind of nervous about these things, like for me, I don't know how I'd feel seeing like eyeballs split up in my soup. I want to get there. I think it'd be really cool. But I don't know if I'll ever get there, James. I don't know if I can do it.
Well, you don't have to. I mean, like that's the beauty of combining this ancestral knowledge, because what we're talking about is stuff that our ancestors knew, but
Hmm.
combining it with modern techniques. So that's really what Pluck is, right? So we're
Hmm.
taking organ meats that our ancestors ate as far back as just our grandparents and parents
Yeah.
for some people, but even further. And we're just taking the modern technique of preservation, which is freeze drying, and we're applying it in a way that there's no new habit. Like you already season your meals. We're just saying, okay, instead of seasoning it with Lowry's or Old Bay, use our seasoning. You're getting all these new nutrients that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And technically, if we can do that with eyeballs or testicles or ovaries or lungs or brain, like why wouldn't you do that too?
Well,
Like,
can I say everything you're saying is, have you ever heard of the study Pottinger's cats?
oh, of
Have you
course,
heard?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people don't know that study, and I talk about it often. There's also the Pottinger's Cat's Prophecy, which is a great book that kind of went alongside that. And I mean, they literally talked about if you, and it was just Pottinger's Cats was just kind of taking away nutrients, not even what's happening today, which is a bunch of chemicals are also being added in to our foods and substances, right? But just the taking away of vital nutrients and like what you were saying, like not eating brain, we could possibly attribute that to why Alzheimer's is super high. Um, I 100%, everything that you said and stated is absolutely backed up with Pottinger's cats. And they did it from the study from 4 to 7 generations of cats. And just within 4 generations, it changed the way the cats were hormonally. It changed the way that they were able to eat or not eat certain foods. They were able to change so many things in the cats. And they said, and they warned it, I think it came out in the 70s. They warned that if we continued down the SAD diet, right, the standard American diet, that we were going to see this as a huge influx with the next generations. And it has totally happened. I mean,
Oh yeah.
we're in 2025 and looking back, I mean, just in the past few generations, we have more issues with kids not being able to eat foods. And I mean, I know my husband and I both struggle with gluten. Also like food sensitivities in general. If you look at even, it's so sad to say, but even like Down syndrome is up so much higher than it used to be.
Spectrum, yeah,
Yeah,
autism.
exactly. Anything on that type of spectrum, there's so many different things. Alopecia, skin conditions, just anything you could think of is up 110-fold. So it's awesome to see, which do you feel like you're kind of an advocate in like the cooking industry in general? Because I don't hear enough chefs, in my opinion, talk about how important genuine nutrition is. Do you consider yourself an advocate talking about these things, or do you feel like more chefs actually do talk about it, but they're just not as outspoken in general
Oh,
about
I don't know
nutritional
if,
diet?
yeah, I don't know if I'm so tapped into the chef industry to know. I mean, I definitely think that I definitely think through social media that the noise has gotten a lot louder. And so if anything, for most people that the information's out there
Hmm.
on so many levels. And I don't know if it's specifically coming from chefs, but it's definitely coming from people. There's a lot of information out there. The biggest issue is that it's harder to filter what works or doesn't work. So there's people
Yeah.
out there that are like, oh my gosh, I keep seeing all these things about carnivore. I guess I'm going to go carnivore. And then they do that and then they don't feel well or there's something going on. And it's like, I really, while I said earlier about like, oh, follow the dignity, have the dignity of your process. I
Hmm.
also think though that just like we were talking about mindful eating is you got to kind of also mindfully digest information and news. And if you just try to take in everything, you're going to be pretty overwhelmed. I mean, it's really it's almost like I would equate it to just someone who's just eating the standard American diet. Like they're just like, oh, I'm just going to do what my government says or what people tell me, my doctor tells me, and I'm just going to do that. But the reality is that if you kind of like just listen to your instincts, like, does that make sense to you? If it doesn't, then move on. Like literally, like trust your instincts. And I know that sometimes that can be convoluted and scary, but we usually have a first reaction to everything. And it usually happens within the first few seconds, like first 30 to 60 seconds, but we just don't listen to it. I mean, I remember, and this might sound like it's not connected, but it really is. Like let's just say you're someone who's dating. Well, I remember when I was single, I had a good friend who shared this with me, and she was so right. But she was like, whenever you go on a first date, the person you go on the date with tells you everything about themselves in that date. They'll say all the things that are wrong, that they don't like, or I'm seen like this, or I did this. They'll just talk about themselves. And yet people don't listen. And so then later on, they're now down the road, they're married to that person, like, why is this person not changing? Oh, wait a second, if you just go back to that first date, they told you I don't change, whatever it is, like I'm
So
this
true.
way or that way. It's like they told you exactly who they were. You just didn't listen. And I think
Mhm.
that's true with everything. We just have to be more mindfully like listening. And I'm not saying we have to control it. I'm just saying just listen. Sometimes it won't make sense. Like this is a tangent, but before we got on, you mentioned how you wanted to hear how Margaret and I met.
Mhm.
Well, this is actually that story. So, but it ties into what I'm saying. So we met. She was training for a marathon through this organization in LA, where she was raising money for it. And I had previously done that organization. I had ran the organization multiple times and fundraised. I had assistant coach. Like I was very involved in that organization. And that year, I had supported someone in joining the organization, and I told for her to start running her marathon. And I had said, "Hey, if you do this, I'll volunteer for you." So I was volunteering at the training program, and Margaret had just run something like 12 miles, um, and
She's
she
a
had come
stud.
in. Well, she came in and I was like, and she just happened to be among some of the first groups, and we just started talking. And I wasn't trying to hit on her or anything, but I was just trying to support her. And
Mhm.
like I was handing out like orange slices or something like that. And I was just like, how was it? How you doing? And we started talking. And then eventually it was like, oh, what do you do? What do you do? And it's like, oh, you're a nutritionist. Well, I'm a chef. Oh, well, we should talk and meet up another time and see if we can work together. And that was kind of it. Like then we went our separate ways. We exchanged information. It wasn't at all trying to, I'm attracted to this person. I want to try to date them. It was just like, oh, maybe we'll talk and see if we can work with each other. And then like 2 or 3 weeks later, we met at a restaurant, and I now saw her all like dolled up. She wasn't just running 12 miles, whatever. But I saw her and I was like immediately taken about by her beauty. But then we start talking and we're hitting it off. And then she got up to go to the bathroom, and I literally felt like I got hit by lightning bolt. And in
Aw.
that lightning bolt, I heard a voice say, "This is the woman you're going to marry." And I know that stuff you hear in movies, but I was in 30 and I had never heard it. That had never happened to me. And I dated many people, many women, and that was the first time it happened to me. And so I was like, in a moment where I could be like, well, that makes no sense. I just met her. Right. So I could have literally changed my perspective and been like, well, that's silly. That doesn't make any sense. Or I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to listen. Like I could have fought it, but I was at
Mhm.
a time and place in my life where I was like, okay, I just received it. And I was like, okay. And then I started panicking because I was like, oh, shoot, we're having a meeting, a business meeting, and I just got assigned that this is supposed to be more than business, like it's supposed to be relationship. So how do I pivot without seeming like a creep? Like that was basically what I started panicking on. And I'm happy to report that I did pivot. But yeah, I mean, it was truly like a moment of like, do you surrender or do you fight it? And I think most of us are fighting. We're fighting our own innate natural intelligence about what we need or don't need. And I think the more we can just surrender mindfully, so not surrender and just down that gallon of ice cream. I'm saying surrender and just let's be honest with ourselves that whatever you're doing is not working.
I love
And
that.
and take the next step, ask for help, or take a breath and then just start slowly, or whatever it is. But don't feel like you have to do it alone. Don't self-diagnose. Go to someone who's an expert who can support your process.
Thank you for
And
saying that.
yeah, and just start to make change, but
And
I really do believe very strongly in that, like that we don't have to keep hitting our heads up against brick walls.
so thank you for saying the diagnose thing, because that's probably the number one thing I tell people. And because I'm obviously a holistic health practitioner, but I'm not anti-allopathic medicine, which is Western modern medicine. My mom just had cancer removed from her throat last week. I can't cut her open and take out cancer. I wasn't the 22-year-old girl who saved my mom when she had like internal bleeding the next day, afterwards. So I thank you for saying that. I know that doctors get to play with all the fun toys and do the MRIs and the X-rays and things like that, but they have those for a purpose. So yes, please, people go get diagnoses, especially if you're feeling things. But also too, can I say that internal voice that you're talking about? Obviously, me being a Christian, so this past month when I found out that I had yeast, you're gonna die laughing at me because I felt like I had that same voice happen. 2 months ago, I literally, my husband, because I had issues, with my gut and my microbiome, we couldn't figure out what it was for the past few years, and I know it's been this way for a while. My husband would pray over me every night and they lay his hand on my stomach and be like, Lord, like, please just let us know what we can do each day for Savannah and her health, which is so kind and intentional. Literally, James, I kid you not, I heard a male voice in my head go, "It's okay, Savannah, you're healed." And I went, Jeremiah, I am so like I want to be healed so badly that I just made up a voice in my I completely disregarded it and played it down. Because also too, like I didn't feel any better instantly. So I immediately kind of knocked it, right? And I actually asked my husband, which I feel so bad about. I asked him to stop praying over my stomach. I was like, I think it's so much on my mind and I need to focus on loving on people and my clients. I need to take a step back. And then the next week is when my UTI, the worst one I ever had, flared up. And I was like, see, I'm obviously not healed because this is the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. But instead of going into it and being like mad or angry at God or even at my own self or my husband or these situations, I kind of took a step back and was like, I just need to pay attention to the symptoms this time. Kind of like what was happening with you and your wife, right? Like, okay, if I heard this, I need to pay attention and focus and figure out the pivots. And that's when I started going through the process of doing what I normally do, seeing what didn't work. And literally a week later, I was like, I don't know, I'm still dying. I think I'm just going to cave and go get an antibiotic. Like, even though I haven't taken one for years, I'm just going to go do it because I feel like I'm dying. And guess what? That same voice came back in my head while I was crying at my office because I had to cancel clients. I was driving in the car and I kept hearing, no, do not get an antibiotic. And guess what? When I got to the office and I sat down and I prayed and I took a step back, I called a friend who's also in the holistic health field. I went over all of my stuff with her, and she and I together, we're the ones who discovered that it might be yeast. And the number one thing that feeds yeast besides food is taking antibiotics. And so if I went in not listening to that voice, I would have gone in and made my yeast inflammation 1,000 times worse because I'd be killing the good and the bad bacteria that actually keep yeast at bay. So like it's funny and so sweet hearing that also come into you with like dating and having that awareness. Um, I I don't know if you've had any healthcare things like that as well, where you feel like you actually paid attention to, the internal, what you'd say the internal voice, but for me, it was like the Lord speaking to me. So, have you had that also with healthcare at all, or anything with like your gut or food in general?
I mean, I had a kidney stone. I've had,
Oh, those are the worst.
yeah, I had that right out of college. But that was less of a voice and was more, that was the moment where I really learned that what I ate affected my health. Because I think that's a
Hmm.
disconnect that a lot of people have. And I didn't learn that till I was in my early 20s. Um, but I think in general, I am constantly asking questions and I'm constantly just trying to be in my body. And what I always look towards food, sleep, and stress. I always look toward those three things, no matter what is happening. Like Like, my wife recently had gotten a diagnosis of melanoma cancer of her skin. And what we did, this was 6 weeks ago, she's fine now, she's cleared. But what we did
Good.
immediately once we heard about that was we're like, okay, so we all have cancer cells. And the difference between someone that has cancer and someone that doesn't is that those cells got turned on. So what turns those cells on? Well, it's the environment that they're in. So the key is to basically co-create an environment that doesn't turn on those cells. So what turns them on and what turns them off? And so she immediately went keto, because keto has been one of those things that's known to support cancer, or to not to decreasing cancer. And we immediately, like, she did vitamin C IV, she did hyperbaric, she did all these different things to help lower inflammation, to clean out her body, and to change the environment. So then that way, when she went back for the surgery to remove the part of her, the skin, when she even went in, the guy was like, oh, that person totally made a bigger deal of this than it is. And we're like, what? Like, so for 6 weeks, we thought she was, going to be at stage 4 cancer or something like that. And the guy was like, oh, no, no, this is very common. And, he's like, this is totally small. It's isolated. I'm going to cut it. If anything, I'm cutting out way more than I need to, and she'll be fine. And she was right. And she totally was. But it was like, for 6 weeks, we were like, okay, take a deep breath. Let's go inward. And the other thing I will say, and I think this is probably even the most important part of this story, is even though she was the one diagnosed, we both did the protocol. That you don't go solo. That anytime you're doing a protocol in the household, everyone does it, because you have to have solidarity. You have to, it's too, like everything we talked about, like where I'm the type of person, if it's in the household, I'm going to eat it. Well, for the person that just had to go 100% gluten free, that's not very kind to have gluten products in the house that would be tempting to them. It's just not. You're setting them up for failure, just like I would be setting myself up for, like, if there were cookies or ice cream in the house or something like that, right? So we do everything. Any changes to the household routine, they affect all of us, and we all get on the same page. And I really strongly believe that, how important that is for success.
I I can't wait for my family to listen to this.
Hmm.
I feel convicted as well. I also, James, I have a million and one other questions that I wish I could ask you, but I also value your time and that you're a very amazing business owner. And I want to not take up more of your time today, but I'm going to give you our last final three questions coming up. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can
Okay.
always do this again too.
Okay. Yay.
If your audience has questions and they're like, well, let's do this, let's do part two, and there's new things you want to dive into, we can totally do that.
Yeah, I do. We actually went over quite a few things that the audience asked, but I know that there are some, I just feel like I could talk to you all day though. So I'm
Yeah,
sure your
totally.
wife is amazing. It'd be fun to talk to her too. But I wanted to just kind of go over what casting seeds is, and also just thank you for being such an amazing part of what we are, because I feel like you are what the epitome of casting seeds is. Because what we are is overall a discernment podcast, right? So discernment is having that intimate individual life and discernment, right, with Christ day to day. And it's understanding the key things that we need to learn on how to listen and understand that discernment, but then live it out, right? Specifically. That's why we call ourselves a holistic health podcast, but ultimately we jokingly say it's a holistic health podcast, because we want to listen to the discernment that's being given to us and what we're experiencing. So to break it down, it's just verses Matthew 7 and verses Matthew 13, where God talks about not casting pearls to swine, right? So if you have, in Matthew 7, if you have a pearl of knowledge and wisdom, you don't have to give it all the time. It's also good about having discernment as to when to give those things lovingly and to teach lovingly. And then Matthew 13, it's also about being the parable of the sower, right? So being able to plant seeds and know that the right time of when it will actually grow. So again, using discernment, right? And all those things. So that's why now knowing our name is casting seeds and kind of why we do it, why we took casting pearls and planting seeds and kind of mashed it together, I have a few questions for you. The first one is, have you ever had a casting pearl moment in your life where you feel like you were given like knowledge of wisdom, or you gave wisdom, and you felt like, oh, looking back, like I wish I was able to do that differently, and you were able to learn from that mistake, is the first one. And then the second one was, overall, when it comes with planting a seed, what do you think was the most significant thing that kind of shifted your life where you're like, man, once that took root, everything grew? And then I'll save the last question for the end because I don't want to overwhelm you
Yeah.
with questions.
Well, there's a lot of situations that I learned from that help shape who I am. So I'll try to pull just one.
It's hard to pick one. It really
Yeah,
is.
there's many because as I've mentioned through this podcast, I'm very much a work in progress.
Mhm.
Uh, I would say that one of the things that's really shaped how I am a business person, and I would say of how I self-care as well. So as you mentioned at the top, I used to own a company called Wholesome to Go, and it was a meal delivery service in Los Angeles. And I owned and ran that for 8 years, and I killed myself. Like I didn't. It was just like I basically tried to take private chefing, which I knew very well, and I tried to mass produce it, which is not very scalable if anyone understands. Because when you private chef, you're customizing everything. So I tried to take that intention of customizing everyone's meal on a mass level. But what happens is when you're trying to customize a meal for 100 people, you're making 100 meals 3 times a day, right? Plus we were doing 2 days of food. So it was like 600 meals all of a sudden. So it was completely not scalable. And on a certain level, I didn't know that it was a mistake until we grew really big. And then once we grew really big, it was like, oh my gosh, this is not working. So what happened during that time, during those 8 years, is I started getting panic attacks. I was like, um, I wasn't exercising. I wasn't eating well. I was hardly getting any sleep because I had so much I had to do in a day that I would wait till it was really late at night to do it and to prepare for the next day. So I was maybe getting 3, 4 hours sleep a night, maybe. And I never had a vacation. And if I did go away, I still had to work. I mean, it was really aggressive in terms of trying to build a business where I was supporting other people's health, but I was the one suffering the most. And what I learned from that was, and that I applied to my current business, is that that isn't how it has to be. Like that, this idea, as you kind of like look around the world and look at how people's work weeks are, you start to see like, oh, the work week that we assume is the same everywhere is not. So the 40-hour work week that's 5 days a week in the US is not true in other countries. Like Italy does not do 40 hours a week. They do less. They have an hour for lunch every day. I think it's actually 2 hours for lunch every day. I mean, there's such a different emphasis in that society. There's other countries as well that they don't, it's not a 40-hour work week. It's different. And so I started to look at that and realize, oh, wait a second. So that you're telling me that I can build the business the way I want that fits the lifestyle I want. And two, I can make sure that the health plan is part of the business plan. Like they don't have to be separate things, and one doesn't have to have precedence over the other. So when I started this business, I was very intentional that I wanted it to be online. I wanted it to be a product, and I wanted it to be something that I could just set the tone for. I could basically communicate, hey, we only have customer service during these hours, and when it's outside those hours, we will get back to you within 24 hours. But like I set it so that I could make sure that I was taking care of my health, also run the business, but also still end my day at a certain time so that I could be with my kids. And I completely built it that way with those intentions. And I know that that's might be challenging for some people who are who are employees of other businesses who dictate. But I think if anything, COVID really showed us that we can restructure schedules, because a lot of people work from home with companies that never saw that as an option, and now they do. So I think it's really an amazing lesson to realize that A, you have more power when you have intention, and then you also can really make change when you're just where you're just really clear about what lifestyle you want, because sometimes you might find actually that full-time job you don't even need. Like, it just depends. It depends on what the outcome, what the lifestyle that you want. Like, I would almost figure out what lifestyle you want and then back into it, opposed to like, well, I'm going to do this to eventually get this lifestyle. It's like, well, what do you want? What do you really need? Because some people will be like, well, I need tons of money. I need this and that. Yeah, but if you move to Spain and you were living in Spain, the cost of living would be lower. You'd be getting local food. You wouldn't need that kind of money. Like, so get clearer about what it is you want, and then pick the environment and the situation that will get you there. Because particularly if you're like me, like where it's really important you, A, to take care of your health, but two, to be with your kids, then you got to set that intention. You got to find the job that will deliver, or either find it or create the job that will deliver that outcome. So that was definitely a big learning.
I love that whole theme. I feel like so far it's been all about intentionality. It's been that way through your business and your life, and especially with like again that sense of control. The healthy
Right.
sense of control is being intentional and aware. I love that. So is that then, would you say that's kind of a similar answer then for also what you feel like was planting a seed in your life that took growth? Do you feel like intentionality was the main thing for you that kind of set you
Um,
off to where you are today?
yes, but I'll pick a very specific situation for that question. So, and this is really, I mean, ultimately one of the seeds for me to figure out Pluck, or to even come to Pluck. It's not exact, it's not a parallel. It's not like this happened and then Pluck happened, but it
Mhm.
definitely started the process of getting me to think like this. And it was both of my girls when they were very young. I think my youngest was about 1.5 and the older was about 4.5. We went to Canada to see my wife's father, and during that trip, my kids got Shiga toxin, which is a form of E. coli and is very deadly for young kids and elderly. And it's basically one of those similar, like where you cannot give someone an antibiotic if they have Shiga toxin. You could make it worse. And a lot of times people do get antibiotic and make it worse because they don't realize that they have Shiga toxin. So we were very fortunate that we discovered that it was, and that was because my wife had an instinct and she did a stool test, and then we discovered they had Shiga toxin. And
Wow.
then the Shiga toxin, when you have that, you can't keep anything down. So like literally nothing, not even water. You can't keep anything down. And so for 3 days, my oldest was in it, and luckily she came out of it eventually. But my youngest was in it kind of a long time, a scary time amount of time. And she was already, as I mentioned, she was only like 1.5 or 2 or something like that. And she was already a very lean child. And so I watched her literally go to skin and bones. It was very scary. And eventually she started eating something, and it was toast that helped her. It took a while, but eventually she was able to keep down some toast. And it's similar to anyone that has an illness, the food that is their safety food, then they get a little addicted to, right? And
Mhm.
so she started to get really addicted to toast, which as people, I mean, it's gluten-free toast, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean it's healthier. It's just gluten-free, right? So
Yeah.
people make that mistake. Gluten-free doesn't mean healthy. It just means no gluten. And
Yes.
if anything, a lot of times the store-bought gluten-free is worse than the regular stuff. And so we were watching our daughter just get addicted to this toast and just feeling like, oh my gosh, what are we doing here? But we recognized like, well, this is the only thing she's willing to eat right now, and we'd rather have her eat something than nothing. And so I just remember thinking as a chef, I'm like, I wish there was something I could put on that toast that would support her in getting more nutrients, particularly whole food nutrients, that would make that toast better. And that's ultimately what Pluck became. because it was like, well, what's the most nutrient dense food in the world? It's organ meats. Organ meats are truly Mother Nature's multivitamin. But we have hurdles. We don't know how to cook them. We don't know where to source them. And most of all, we think they're gross. And then if you have a kid, you can't give them capsules necessarily. And like you said earlier, it's hard to get them to eat the actual organ and even in pate form or cooked and stuff. And so it was like, how do I overcome those hurdles and make it as easy as sprinkling something on my daughter's toast? And that's truly where Pluck came. And like even to this day now, if we ever eat out or a day goes sideways because we didn't plan and we're just getting pizza or something like that, um, I feel 200% better because my kids are sprinkling Pluck on it. Like I'm just like, okay, yeah, they're getting pizza, but they also just got their organs. And I don't think anyone else can say that, you know what I mean, in this moment, that when their kid is eating pizza, they're also getting organs. So it's like, it's a win and I'll take it. Um, so that was definitely the seed.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that origin story. The fact that it was for your family and for your daughter's health. You are a wonderful husband and a wonderful dad, which is what makes you, I'm sure, a great boss, but a great owner of a company too, right? It's a part of your life, it's a part of your passion, and you guys consume the product. You love the product. Um, I know my family, we love the product too. And I actually was just about to order some within the next few days for my mom post cancer because she's having a hard time keeping things down or eating large amounts because it was in her throat. So the fact that it's also small and easy to eat. Like you can even eat it spoonful. Like I could. It's so good.
Yeah,
So
that's how I do it too sometimes.
yeah, right. So I have to thank you also for your product because I know if it's helped you and your family, I can't even imagine all of the awesome stories that you guys have received, but also how much it's helped other people be able to experience true nutrition in such a simple, normal, natural form. So I'm really thankful for your product, James,
Well,
honestly.
thank you. And I am so grateful every day for every aspect of it that I was the one that came up with it. You know, it's very rare to find a real food product that's not made in a laboratory. Like I happen to be the first person to combine these two ingredients, which is unprecedented in today's day and age. I'm grateful that it's resonating with people and that parents are constantly reaching out to me and just telling me how much they love giving it to their kids, which is exactly why I do it as well. And so I don't take any of it for granted. You know, I think that going back to the mindfulness you touched on and encapsulated in a lot of what I was saying, like I'm mindfully in this business. Like I don't take any part of it for granted. And I'm so grateful for I'm so grateful that I was the vessel that received the knowledge of putting this product together, you know, and that I could support this because I do know for a fact it is changing people's lives because they've told me, and I'm getting even clamped even saying it, but it just like that is my life's purpose, is to help people with their health. And so I'm just so grateful that I could be that vessel and to have the follow through enough to listen, to create the product and to support people with their health and getting whole animal into their diets.
Well, so because you've done so well with discernment, I have to ask, and this is the final question today, which I feel like you've actually already answered this so many times throughout this podcast episode. But I would love to know if you could give us planting like one seed of wisdom that you wish that you knew when you were younger, or just something that you've learned recently, that could really plant a seed into the hearts of the listeners today. Which I do feel like discernment and also following through with when you're like presented with something to actually go do it has been your main theme. But what would you kind of sum up the seed of wisdom for people to go and do, like something they could actively go do today after listening to this?
I mean, there's so many I could pull, but the one that I'm just kind of resonating with right now in this moment is that just to remember that we can do hard things, you know, that we've talked a lot about that comfort zone that so many of us get into, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of resist change, particularly around food. it's because of that comfort zone, and that it's okay. Like it's going to be challenging at first, but it does get better and it gets easier. And I think that my father recently passed away just 2 weeks ago, and it's
So
brought up
sorry.
a oh yeah, no, thank you, but it's brought up a lot of feelings and complex thoughts for me. And I think the one that's most present is that, none of us can control when it's time for us to go. And because of that, we really do have to be mindful of our day to day and strive towards being, on this planet as long as we can in a healthful way. And I think to do that, we have to be open to doing hard things sometimes, that any change is going to be challenging, but that it will get easier, and it's worth it, particularly if it's one that adds to your health, to your longevity, and to the well-being of you and your family. It's worth it.
Thank you so much. And I'll be praying for you and your family, especially in the time of loss, going through your wife's cancer and then having that. I'm so sorry. That's a lot. And if you ever need anything, or if you're out here in Orange County, just know you guys can get free work on by me if you ever need like alignment work or whatever. I'm here to help you and support you guys because that's a lot of stress and anxiety to go through. So I'm here to
It was
support you in any way.
it was definitely a heavy month, but yeah, no, I'm very grateful to be on the other side of my wife's diagnosis, and then yeah, the one with my father passing, I'm still processing, of course, and probably will be the rest of my life. But yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Course. Well, take your time through that process. And my husband and I will be praying for you, and I know the listeners will be praying for you as well. But James, I'm so thankful that you came on today, especially knowing everything that you've been dealing with. I feel so honored. I could cry. I can't believe it. But if honestly, if there's anything that you or your family ever need, Jeremiah and I are here to support you through that. And especially through your business. And I'm so excited to do try. I think the only one I haven't tried with Pluck, I think, is the spicy one, and then the one
The
with
pure,
nothing. Yeah, the
the
pure.
pure, yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
excited to
definitely.
try those.
Yeah, they're. I'm very happy with all of them, and yeah, thank you for amplifying the message and for offering to have me on. And for those that want to check it out themselves, I'm sure you'll put show notes, but they can go to eatpluck.com and get your own pluck. And you can find us on socials at eatpluck or at Chef James Berry. That's my personal one.
Yeah,
And
and
you'll actually, if you go to at Chef James Berry, there is a little reel kind of sharing my dad. So if you're curious to see that, I would love you to take a look.
yeah, I'd love to. Well, thank you again. I know you're so busy, and I took way longer on this interview than I ever thought I was going to, but I just love listening to you. So thank you so much, James, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Savannah. Take care.
I'm gonna stop the recording 1 second.